welcome to a Very English Craft Room, and another in the scrapbooking series. In this video I will be scrapbooking about the Baden Powell Challenge and the big gig in London that my daughter and her friends attended. This is as part of the Scrap Squad's 12 Days of Spring Scrap Lifts Challenge 1. The sketch for this scrap lift had one photograph, lots of floral embellishments and 15 little squares. So I started by cutting squares that were 5 centimetres by 5 centimetres out of various different papers, trying to keep to the colour scheme of the colours that were in the photograph. Prior to printing the photograph off on my Canon selfie, I put a filter on it that removed the colour from the background. So the background is all in monochrome and just the actual subjects of the photograph are actually in colour. So the photograph is of my daughter on the left there and two of her friends who went to dancing and brownies and guides and rangers and drama club with her. They'd actually been best friends for many years at this stage of this photograph, which I think you can tell by the pose on the photograph. So the photograph was taken when we were down at the Tower of London. They were all taking part in their Baden Powell Challenge for guides, and I was one of the guiders that had taken several coachloads of girls down to London for the challenge. Not only did they get to go to places like the Tower of London, some of them also got to go to the big gig, which was a concert that was put on just for guides and old brownies and the rangers, and had quite a lot of new bands and up and coming bands and some top name bands, and it was a wonderful experience. So now I've cut out all the squares. I'm actually using a distress tool to distress the edges of all of the squares there, just to give a bit of texture and to make the edges not look quite so straight when they're there laid on the page, as was in the original sketch for the Scrap Lift Challenge. Guiding is something that we've always done in my family. My mum was a guider, and I was a brownie, a guide, a ranger, a young leader, and then finally a guider myself. I was a Queen's Guide, which was the predecessor to the Baden Powell Challenge that these girls were celebrating having completed. The experience of the big gig concert itself was something to behold. As you can imagine, all these girls from 10 upwards screaming at all these young boy bands. The noise was tremendous. So now I've distressed the edges of all those squares. You can see they look roughed up on the edges, and I've moved them across the cutting board in the same order they were in as I pre-arranged them, and I'm just using an ordinary piece of white 12 by 12 cardstock to base this on, as was the original from the scrap lift. So I'm just using some double-sided tape on the back of all of these squares to stick them on, and I will use the T-square to start with just to get me going, to ensure that they are relatively straight, although I don't think they end up being 100% straight, but it really didn't matter in the end because of the edges being roughed up and no longer straight. So I'm just tipping the dust off there that had got on from the roughing up the edges using the distressing tool. So there you are, the T-square to pop the first few on. So today is Easter Sunday and the weather isn't as bad as it was predicted it was going to be. We had some beautiful warm sunny days earlier in the week, which was typical because actually I was working all day on those days, and then when I've had some days off the weather took a 12-degree dive, 12 degrees Celsius dive, and has been a little bit more overcast. Although it has been nice because some of our lockdown restrictions here in the UK have been eased, so I was able to meet up with my daughter and her husband and my son and his partner and their dog and my husband, and we met in the park to exchange Easter eggs and to exchange presents with my daughter as it had been her 30th birthday. When this photograph was taken, the girls were 13-14 years old, so it is quite a number of years ago now. I'm just matting this photograph on some of the paper that I've used for one of the squares there with little stars and daisies on it, and I'm using the ruler just to tear against to give a slightly roughed edge again, so that I didn't have to use the distress tool on it. And then matting that layer on another layer of sort of a blue denim-y one, which again is one of the squares that I've used on the little grid layout there. This layout was quite labour intensive with all the distressing and cutting of the papers, and then all the fussy cutting of the flowers and leaves later on, but it was worth it. I actually really do like this layout. I think it gives a nice little fresh look, and I think it suits the subject matter really well. So now I'm starting to pull out some of the larger embellishments that I've got, like die cut type embellishments. These are mainly Vicky Bouton embellishments, and I'm pulling out a few. The reason I chose them with little bits of purpley colour in is because the neckers of their uniform were a similar sort of purple colour, and hence why in a couple of those papers on the background there is some purple in there. I'm sort of playing around trying to find just what I want. The butterfly is there because there was a butterfly in the original layout, and I do use a butterfly, but not that one. I use one that I fussy cut out in the end. So I found a little sticker there that says something about having fun. I think it says it's time to have fun, something along those lines, which I'm going to use, but not in its entirety. I'm going to cut it up and place it onto the squares in a little while. So now starting with the fussy cutting of all the flowers. So I wanted to pull out the sort of lilac-y purple ones from this page here, so I cut 2 or 3 of those out. And you'll see that I'm actually fussy cutting this little butterfly out of the same paper as that. So here we are with one of the little flowers. Oh, it's quite a big flower actually. So I was taking my time. This is actually speeded up a little. Taking my time to make sure I can cut out all the individual leaves and things as well. So having cut out 3 flowers from that one, I will then start having a look in a second at some of the other papers I'd selected. So I'm just fussy cutting the 3rd one out here, as you can see. So from this sheet I'm going to cut out some of the blue flowers there. A lot of the fussy cutting actually took place off the camera, but you can see the results there as I'm popping them down on the paper there. So I think I just did 2 or 3 from that page. There wasn't much of interest to me on it really. There was a lot of them were actually sort of almost landlocked with other bits of flowers, so I didn't bother too much with them. On the sheet that's underneath that darker one, you'll see there's some quite stylized flowers, but I'm going to cut out the centre of the large flowers there that are blue, and then the individual flowers that are blue. This is slightly shiny, this paper. It's got a little bit of glossiness to it, so it adds another depth. And I also cut a lot of the leaves out from this page. The fact that there are flowers in this layout is quite apt really, because a lot of the patrol names in guides have always been based around flowers. I myself was a daffodil and an orchid, as well as a nightingale. And my daughter was a poppy and a daisy. Bizarrely they were elephants and penguins, and all sorts of random things, dolphins, random things like that. Comment down below if you were in guides or brownies and what your patrol or 6 name was. So you see I am cutting just the centre part of this flower out because I just want the blue really rather than the yellows there. Although there are some yellows in the background, I didn't want too many, but it does pick out the yellow that's actually within the photograph. One of the girls' bag has got some yellow on it. So now I'm happy that I've got everything that I need. I'm now starting to stick things down, starting with the photograph. So originally I had it as a little bit of a jaunty angle, but in the end I ended up with it being parallel to the top and the bottom. So the little title I've chosen is Fun with Friends, and the friends came from a sheet of stickers that were around birthdays, and then the fun was on another set of puffy words, and the with I will make up from individual authors in multicolours. So normally I would use the T-square to align the words on the page, but I wanted to nestle the word with in amongst the word friends there. And actually what I end up doing is, once I've got the word fun on, I pull up the dot from the top of the I in with and place it on top of the N, because you can see here, look, it's going to cover it up. So take the little dot off, pop it on, and then I'm just going to place it on top of the actual N there, which actually I think gives quite a nice look in the end. So you can see now that that little title bit is finished, and I'm just going to stick the stickers on that say something about ready to have some fun, or it's time to have some fun. We'll have a look in a minute, see what it says. So not really, I can't read it from here. Ah yes, now I can see it says ready to have on the red square and lots of fun on the blue. So fun with friends. So now just rearranging the flowers, because I can never remember where I've put the embellishments. Like I've said before, sometimes I take a photograph of my phone to give me a bit of guidance, but I didn't here. So I'm just having a bit more of a play around to see what I think should go where. And for some reason I'm determined that big butterfly is going somewhere, but actually it doesn't in the end. So that there is almost the finished look, but it isn't quite. You'll see when I actually stick things down that some of the things are in slightly different places than they are at the moment. At this stage I didn't really know if I was going to write any journaling and where I would put it, but I do actually end up with a white square of paper on top of that yellow one with flowers on it, with just a little bit of journaling to explain what the page is about. So once I'm happy with the placement, I will then start sticking things down with the double-sided tape and some wet glue. So nearly finished now. I think there may be a little bit more to stick on, but I'm not 100% sure right now. Yep, just sticking a few of the bits down still into the final position. And like I say, this layout did take quite a long time to do, and I have speeded up this video quite considerably, but I do think it was worth it. So I have written the girls' names on the edging near the photograph there, on the edging of the layers that their photo was stuck on, and now I'm preparing a piece of paper just to write the journaling on. Again, I'm using the ruler just to give a rough edge. And I'm just writing a very small amount about what happened. So my daughter's Emily, and the girl in the middle, the taller girl, is called Grace, and the girl on the other side is also called Emily. So they were just known as Big Emily and Little Emily throughout their dancing life. And my daughter was known as Little Emily even then, when she was the oldest Emily in the whole of the dance school. It was just a name that stuck, and it was one of her dance teachers who had originally given her that name. So now that the layout is finished, I would like to thank you for joining me in a very English craft room, and ask that if you have enjoyed this video that you press on the like and subscribe buttons and join me once again in a very English craft room.